for me, but they all dead now. So she attributes her longevity to soda. Like probably one of the worst possible things that you could ingest, like empty calories. You've got the carbonic, the phosphoric acid, high fructose corn syrup, not to mention caffeine, as well as the artificial colorings, the artificial flavorings, the preservatives, all this crazy stuff. So is there a way to know if this is actually valid or not? And what science tries to do is they look at individuals, not just one person, but large groups of people who tend to live the longest. And Dan Buettner was a man who coined the phrase, the blue zones. I don't know if you've heard of that, but I'll just call them longevity zones because I don't want to steal Dan Buettner's sort of phrase or whatever. But there are areas of the world, both culturally and otherwise, where people live a lot longer than the rest of us. And that's what we're going to explore right now, because some people, they may not accept Christianity, even after you show them the evidence. They may not accept that Seventh-day Adventism is actually the denomination that follows the Bible closest to any other church. They may not accept the Chinese characters. But again, like I said, once I do that, people are reaching for ways to block it. It's hard for them to block it, because if they say, well, that can't be right, that's not true, then I ask them, I said, but what about the other things in the Chinese characters? They talk about the Trinity, they talk about the flood, they talk about the Tower of Babel, they talk about Cain and Abel, right? They talk about, there's so many things from the Bible that are revealed in the Chinese characters, they're kind of at a loss, right? Even people within Adventism, I don't know if you guys have encountered the sort of anti-Trinitarian difficulty, but the problem with the anti-Trinitarians is that they have no answer to the word ling. Right? It's the one over the three persons that can do anything. So there's nothing really that there's an answer to. And so that's the same reason that Watson and Crick, when they looked at the double helical structure of DNA, instead of acknowledging, they didn't believe in the Big Bang anymore because that was completely ludicrous, right? But what did they believe? Craig, do you remember? They believed in something called panspermia. Yeah, aliens. So they believe panspermia, many seeds of life is what they believe. But that's what you deal with individuals who have come to the point where the prejudice is so high, it's so great, that they cannot acknowledge anything religious, which is why the third presentation is to take care of the rest of the individuals who are still kind of holding out, is I present the longest lived peoples on the earth. And so before I do that, I'd like to ask you to bow your heads with me one more time as we pray. Loving Father in heaven, thank you so much for the preservation of your word and your truth in the oldest language on planet Earth that's still used today. But thank you, Father, that your truth is also embedded in the longest lived people groups on planet Earth, that has been something preserved and is still being preserved. And although some of those zones are weakening, there is still one that has not moved from its original benefit. In fact, it's gotten even stronger after the pandemic. And I just pray that you would speak through me now. I pray that you would use me in spite of myself, my weak, un-Christ-like self, that I would be hidden behind the cross of Jesus Christ. Amen. So let's take a look. Does anyone know who Ponce de Leon was?
Yes, he was an explorer.
Ponce de Leon was an explorer. What was he looking for? The fountain of youth, right? He was a Spaniard, I believe, explorer, and he was looking for a literal fountain of youth, but he never found one. But that doesn't mean we haven't stopped looking for one, right? Individuals are constantly trying to use technology, medicine, etc., to regain that fountain of youth that they once had. This particular person has lines, right, around their face, and do you know what those lines are for? She's going to have the facelift, right? And what's the little syringe there that's coming in for? Probably Botox, right? So a lot of us, even though there wasn't a discovery of the fountain of youth, we're still chasing that dream, right? And what's interesting, even though the economic depression occurred, remember the crash in 2008? Who remembers the crash in 2008? And then there was another recession. They say recession is really a depression, right? For the whole pandemic. Did you know that the branch of medicine that didn't lose anything was still plastic surgery? And that's not even insurance. It's just cash. It's cash. Isn't that crazy? So you also think about other things. Like when you look at somebody, how do you determine how old that person is? By looking at them. Their wrinkles. Where? But particular, where are the wrinkles? Face and where else? Hands. Who said hands? That's correct. Very good. So face and hands. So those who haven't heard this lecture, maybe let me ask you. That's good. That's good. So face, hands. What else? How else do you determine their age? Teeth, hair color. Well, what about their hair color? If it's gray or if it's pigmented. I mean, it might be red. It might be blonde. It might be brown. It might be black. But all hair colors eventually turn gray, right? So hair color, wrinkles, especially face and hands. What else? So loss of hair, thinning of hair or loss of hair. What else? Posture. So have you heard of kyphosis or kyphoscoliosis? What happens over time is the intervertebral discs of your spine begin to get degeneration and the actual vertebrae undergo osteoporosis. And you can get what's called compression fractures. You may not even realize you have compression fractures. So as those compression fractures go, what happens? You kind of get more stooped. And there's some people who have walkers that can't straighten up from this because they have such kyphosis. And that is often due to not only osteoporosis, but actual compression fractures of the spine. Because some people will say, yeah, I used to be 5'6", but now I'm only 5'4". Have you heard people say that? Because over time, their spine has shrunk because of the compression and degeneration over time. So how else do you determine how old someone is? No, by looking at them. I'm saying by looking at them. The gait, right? So one of the things that people asked me about, for example, there's a very famous person who has dementia. And before this person ran for office, I actually said, I have nothing against this person, but they have Alzheimer's, they have dementia. And they're like, I even had family members like after me and saying, how dare you say that? And I said, I'm not saying it bad. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, but she was the apple of my eye. She lived in my home for 15 years. I had nothing against them. But the way I could tell that this individual had dementia was their word choice, their facial expression, and their gait. Their gait. They have kind of some people have, like for Parkinson's, you have kind of a wider based gait, kind of a steppage gait as well. You can see that. And this person who gave me such grief, I said, listen, this isn't just me. So on the post, all I said was pray for this individual because they have this and it's not being dealt with. And so I tagged a neurologist and I tagged a psychiatrist. They said, oh yeah, I've known that for a while. And I'm like, what? Oh, so this person was very upset at me because they felt like I was criticizing. Because this person was in office at the time, right? And they were worried. And I don't know if you guys remember kind of a famous individual who was actually president and had to be removed from office. It was Ronald Reagan. Do you remember when Reagan was diagnosed with Alzheimer's? And so the thing is that this was kind of another issue that was similar to that. And I was just saying, I have nothing against dementia, just so you know. And the other person who was running against them at the time, they were saying, well, I didn't hear you criticize this person, and everybody asked me about that person too. I said, no, I'm not voting for that person either. And I said, well, but they said, well, they're a Christian. I said, but if you look at an interview, they were asked, they said, have you asked forgiveness of your sins? And the answer from that person is, I don't think that I have. And I said, then by definition, this other person who is the opponent of the person with dementia is not Christian. Right, period. Right, of any denomination. I don't care if you're Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, whatever. Acknowledging that you're a sinner and you need a Savior is like square one. For all Christian denominations, I would assume, right? But that's the way, is that gait, word choice, voice can also be, what else? Loss of hearing or other senses, right? Vision. Eyesight, hearing. You know, hearing is the first sense to go. She's absolutely correct. But did you know, although hearing is the first sense to go, it's the last to leave when you die? And that's why I tell families, I'm an emergency physician, and I work with death all the time in my job. And I say, you come up to this person, I said, say what you need to say to this person right now. They're like, but they're out of it, they're gone, they're unconscious. I said, no, they could hear every word of you, possibly. There are people who go to the OR and they are unconscious, but they can repeat word for word everything the surgeon said in the OR. Did you know that? That is absolutely possible. There's also a physician, a friend of mine. Do you remember Kosovo, the big war in there where there was Czechoslovakia, Lithuania, all these countries, there was this big conflict. He actually had his leg blown off by a grenade. And he was brought in to triage, and the doctor said, why do you guys bring me these people? This guy's already dead. And he said he screamed, I'm not dead. But he was unconscious. But he says he could actually hear everything in the room. And for some reason, he could see in the room because his eyes were like this, right? And he, in his heart, screamed as hard as he could, I'm not dead. I'm not dead. And he's like, all right, I'm going to just do whatever I'll this already, whatever. This guy has no leg, but he's alive to this day. He's an elder of one of our churches. And even though it didn't seem like he could hear anything, like he could hear every single thing that was being before you die. So correct, hearing, one of the first things to go for aging. What else? Than I've ever interviewed. Your little church. It's phenomenal, phenomenal. So that's the thing is, yes, go ahead, Esther. So memory, yes. So people tend to lose cognitive function, tend to get less lean mass and more fat mass. That is true overall. Like someone who has lots of lean mass still left and a good physique, they tend to, you think that they're a little bit younger, right? But doesn't have to be that way. And what I wanted to share with you is just one of these things. Is a lot of people tend to dye their hair because it gives them the appearance of being younger, right? Because if your hair is pigmented, right, naturally you should be younger because all of our hair goes from whether you're black, brown, red, or blonde, whatever hair you have, it eventually goes the final pathway to gray, right? And so many people will bleach their hair or dye their hair or whatever in an attempt, right, to kind of get that young appearance back again. And I wanted to share something with you, is if you have your phone, does anyone have an assistant on a phone like Google or Siri? Can you ask your phone, say, hey Siri, is it possible to turn your gray hairs to their original color? Just ask her that and tell me what she says. No, she should just answer. She should just say, say, hey Siri, or hey Google. It should answer you. Who has an iPhone? Don't enter it in, just ask. Just ask verbally.
Hey Siri, is it possible to turn your gray hair back to its original color?
Did she answer you? Try it again. Say, hey Siri.
Hey Siri, is it possible to turn your gray hair to its natural color?
Anyway, when someone gets it to work, tell me what Siri says, okay? Just tell me what Siri says. So I want you to take a look at this. This is actually my hand, okay? When you look at this, welcome. We're glad you're here. Thank you guys for coming in. My hand has a mole on it. It's very rare to have a mole on your palm. But I also want to point out that I've had surgery on my wrist. So all these pictures, you'll see a mole on the palm. By the way, it hasn't grown in 20 years, so don't worry, it's not malignant. But it's rare to see a mole on the palmar surface. But what I wanted to share with you is when you look at this sort of picture, do you see where the root is of the hair? Do you see the little root? You can see a little root. The root I always put near the mole. Do you see the root? Does everyone see the root? Yeah. Now, what color was the hair before? Initially, what was it? White. It was white, and then it turned black. Isn't that interesting? Right? So here's another one that it was kind of thinning and gray, and it got darker and black. Remember, the root is always going to be by the mole. Here's another one. Can you see the scar on the wrist? Can you see the scar there at the bottom? So that's why my hand is very unique. You can tell it's my hand because it's got the mole and it's got the scar on it. I have a plate. I have a titanium plate in my wrist. I broke my wrist when I was in med school. But here are just examples of hairs turning color. But they're not always turning in an obvious fashion. This is actually a nose hair that went from gray to black. Interestingly enough, can you see the root is over here? Can you see what color it was? It was gray initially and turned black. And when somebody gets an answer from Siri, we'll see if it's possible, if she says that's possible.
I got some, I didn't speak it, but
Don't type it, because if you type it, you're going to get all the hit results. What she wants to do, what my point is that in this day and age, people want instant answers. They don't want to do the research. So that's why I'm just saying, just do Hey Siri and see what she says to you. I already know what she says. That's the reason. But I want you to be convinced.
What's the question again?
Can you turn your gray hairs back to their original color? Just say, Hey Siri.
Turn your gray hairs back to your original color.
Turn her volume on.
I have it on.
Says there's no way to turn gray hair black back into its original.
What is her reference for that? What website did she give you for that reference?
From
Healthline.com. So Siri,
There's no guarantee.
no, she says there's no way. If you ask Siri, what she will universally tell you is she will say there is no way that you can turn it back. He just read, and she quotes from Healthline.com. Now, just to give a fuller answer to that, other than obviously I'm doing it, right? I'm showing you pictures where I'm doing it on myself, right? The newest sort of research is, I don't know if you know Cleveland Clinic. Does anyone know who Cleveland Clinic is? So they've done some data on this, but they share that when they look at periods of very stressful times in people, they find that that is actually what causes the graying. But if you withdraw those stressful influences, that they can turn back again. But they also add a caveat. They say, but we have not observed this in anyone over age 40. Now I am turning, how old this month? 50. I'm turning 50 this month.
Oh, that's so old.
It seems young now, right? Of course. But my point is that there's some times when conventional wisdom will not give you a true answer. And to give the benefit, actually it was June, I think it was June. I don't know if you guys saw the data published on reversing Alzheimer's. Did anyone see that?
I did see some.
Very famous. The author is a cardiothoracic surgeon. His name is Dean Ornish, right? So he showed through his program, right, that can basically reverse heart disease, can also reverse Alzheimer's. He recently published this. But essentially what he's doing is he's using remedies like the health message with, in place of, trust in God, he's using transcendental meditation. So just to kind of spoil the whole thing for you, basically, I'll just tell you that right now. But what I'm saying is that sometimes, like these, you can have a black hair. Here's a black hair, but then what color did it turn? It turned gray. And the reason why I actually watch and look at these phenomena is because I know how quickly my hair grows. It grows about 1.25 centimeters a month. So what I can do is I can go back and trace and see what happened there. So I want to learn not just what to do, but what not to do. Does that make sense? Your hair is a timeline for your life. And my wife is a genius. She has figured out an easy way to figure out what was happening at that time. What do you go and review whenever I tell you something?
The pictures we were taking at the time.
Yeah, she looks at the picture and says, we were in this place doing this, and this is what happened at that time. And I want to say that for me, when you look at kind of the reversal, there are 3 areas in my life that cause the gray to black the most. But I'll save that for a little bit later. Also, there are people who have wrinkles. Like you talked about wrinkles specifically on your face and specifically on your hands. Those are 2 things. And for those of you who are Seventh-day Adventists, I want to share with you something very intriguing. That Ellen White was taken in vision, and she saw Lucifer as he is, without a disguise. And do you know what she described him as? She says his forehead. Yes, Carl is actually pointing it out. She said from his eyes, his forehead began to recede. So what is here in your head? The frontal lobe. So he's lost a lot of atrophy in the frontal lobe. But it says his flesh hangs loosely, especially in 2 places. His face and his hands. So he's very old, right? But the thing is, he has lost none of his cunning, is what Ellen White says. But he is degenerating, as any other being would, right, apart from the tree of life. But he degenerates. He has a longer natural lifespan, so to speak. Nothing's really natural because we should be in the Garden of Eden, right? But I find it very intriguing that she points out specifically his hands and his face is where the flesh hangs loosely. So some people, to smooth out the blemishes and the wrinkles, they use makeup as well, right? This is my beautiful wife. Yes. This is her getting ready to go to work, and you can see her little name tag there. And I think she looks great anyway, but her weak point is skin, right? Her weak point is skin. And so this is very interesting. This is, I don't know if you can see, do you see the piercing, the little line there? But can you see just medial to that, just on this side, there's a little kind of red dot, kind of a red dot. She woke up one morning, and what did you tell me?
I didn't sleep.
Why didn't you sleep?
Itchy.
All night long. And when you look at that little dot there, she has a little dot of eczema there, and it drove her bananas. Absolutely bananas. This was on her right ear, and it was driving her crazy. Now, what did we do, like between this picture and the next picture? I don't know if you can still see the dot. It's still there, but it's not as inflamed. It's not as red. It's more kind of just dark there. Now, within 24 hours, where did your symptoms go?
Way.
Like what percent would you say they improved?
100%.
Did you have any itching the next day?
No.
And we did one thing. It wasn't a steroid. It wasn't hydrocortisone. It wasn't anything like that. We did one thing for her, and it was absolutely, it wasn't castor oil. No, it was gone. Tell them what we did.
We resolved a conflict between us.
We resolved a conflict between the 2 of us. Yes. So that is what gave her instant relief. And you could still see where it was, but it faded considerably. But the symptom was 100% gone. And that's what I want to kind of share as the concept of longevity. Your body will tell you when things are good or bad. It will tell you in a way that you can see, hear, smell, touch, or feel. Does that make sense? Of your senses, you can actually discern when something is off, right? Many women, they know that they have an infection because they get up off the toilet and they go, and they have what? An odor, right? They're like, something smells off. or their period is off, or they have a discharge. Women are great at being police for their own health. And that's one of the reasons I personally believe women live longer than men. Women live, on average, about 5 to 7 years longer than guys. As a guy, we wait until the thing is like falling off, right? I think I should go see the doctor now. I literally had a patient one time come in and his head and his eye, half of his head was actually a squamous cell cancer. And it was so bad that maggots were eating into his head in the back. But he had ignored it and let it go on and on and on. You know, a woman, she misses 1 day of her period and she's calling her doctor up. Hey, something's wrong. It never lasts this long, or something like that. They're on it. They know, right? And that is very, very helpful. Another thing I want to share is this is us when we were on a speaking engagement. Where was this, babe? Honolulu. Yeah, we were speaking at the Diamond Head Church. And this is my lovely wife, and this is no makeup. That's her in my alma mater sort of sweater. I went to Stanford for my residency. I'm a Cardinal, so I went to Loma Linda for med school. So this is her, and the funny thing is if you look at the back, I think it's got a better picture. We had a pastor friend of ours say, we appreciate these pictures, but could you send us a picture that what? Doesn't have the red lipstick. And I told him, there's no lipstick. That's just her. That's just her natural coloring. That's just her pigmentation, right? But that's kind of her weak point, is the skin. So we've tried to work on the skin for her, but people sometimes, when they ask you about longevity, they always want to know, well, what should I eat, right? It's all about eating. That's what people tend to think. And I think that's a weak point for us as Adventists, is we overemphasize diet. Sometimes it's not always what you're eating, but what's eating you, right? So I just want to share that as a heartfelt appeal, because I'm Seventh-day Adventist, and I know many of you are. But even though we do a lot of right things, we tend to follow the same trajectory, right? Have you heard the saying, once a man, twice a child? What does that saying mean? It means you revert back. When you become older, you lose your memory, you lose your capability, you become incontinent sometimes, right? And so you were changed as a baby because you wet your diaper, and then you're changed again as an older person, right? So once a man, twice a child. And when you think about this, it can be very depressing, because when we die, they look at the capacity of the human brain, and we've only filled about 3 to 5% of it. Even geniuses like the Einsteins, the Schweizers, only filled like 7 to 10% of it. Do you know neurosurgeons? Like many of you probably know Ben Carson, right? Quite possibly one of the greatest ever to live. He's retired now, of course. But he could remove half of someone's brain. And this is a treatment for seizures that were refractory to medications. And the person lives a normal life. Did you know that? With half the brain gone? How's that possible, right? And there's people who have t-shirts. They'll say, Ben Carson is the greatest surgeon. Anyone with half a brain knows that. Get it? So it's kind of a joke, because he does what's called a hemispherectomy, which gives treatment for people who have seizures that just won't go away, right? And obviously you can't live a life constantly having seizures. But what's interesting is the capacity of the brain is much larger than we once believed. They estimate that the brain, as far as your actual lifespan, would have a capacity of almost 1,000 years, if not more, based on the rate at which you fill it. Very interesting. I had a patient one time, and he came in, and I spoke to him in Spanish. And the wife interrupted me and said, can you please speak to him in English? And I said, well, I thought because of your last name, you might have been from Argentina. She says, we are from Argentina. But ever since his stroke, he can only understand his second language. Wow. Very interesting. Because the speech center of your body is on the dominant hemisphere, which for most of us is the left hemisphere. Like most of us are left brain dominant. I don't know if you've heard that phrase before. But if you learn a foreign language later in life, it goes on the other side. Did you know that? It's very interesting. And the cutoff point is around age 6. That's what they say. And that's why when you learn a new language as an adult, that is one of the strongest ways to prevent Alzheimer's there is. Very, very strong to prevent Alzheimer's. So if you don't speak another language, now's the time to learn one. Protect yourself from Alzheimer's. But I can tell you, what if we were designed not to live 1,000 years, like the brain is sort of hinting now, but what about more than that? What about 5,000 years? What about forever? Well, the people I'm going to talk about don't live forever, but they live a lot longer than the rest of us. I don't know if you remember this old National Geographic article. Who remembers this? That they showed the 3 kind of longest lived zones in the world. This guy kind of standing on his head. Do you remember this? So this was way back in the day that they presented this. And now since then, they've added other longevity to zones, which I'll also explore in just a moment. But the first one in the article was Okinawa, Japan. Now, Okinawa is an island off the coast of mainland Japan, and they believe that the Okinawans are kind of like the islanders of Japan, that they're actually a different sort of race, they're not the same. But in Okinawan culture, men and women live a lot longer than the United States. And one of the theories is that they have a lot less heart disease, breast, and prostate cancer. Does anyone know what the #1 cause of death in the United States is? It's not actually cancer. Did you know that heart disease is the #1 cause of death? Did you know that cancer is the #1 cause of death in another first world country? Does anyone know where it is? I'll give you a hint. Cold. Norway. Norway, cancer is the #1 cause of death. They're the exception to the rule. Heart disease is a lot less prevalent in Norway than most first world countries. Does anyone know what the most common cause of death worldwide is now? Not guns, no. For young people, yes, for young people, when you look at the top 3 causes of death, there's accidents, non-accidental trauma can be up there too, but suicide is top 3 for young people. But I'm talking about overall. Overall, what's the #1 cause of death worldwide? Heart disease is also correct. Candace is correct. It's heart disease. What's the #2 cause of death in the United States? Heart disease is 1. #2 cause in the United States is cancer. #3 cause. It's actually COVID. But it used to be stroke. It used to be stroke. But actually, if you look at the latest data, it's COVID. That's interesting. Now, some people may question that, but I'm just telling you what the stats show right now. But the Okinawans versus the Americans, they have a lot less cancer, a lot less heart disease. They have a plant-based diet, but they have something called ikigai. And the word ikigai in Japanese means the reason you get up in the morning. It's your election, your purpose, your calling. And for Fumiyasu at 84 years old, his ikigai is the Senior Olympics. His event is the decathlon. His event in the decathlon, the pole vault. Anyone know a pole vaulter? Raise your hand. Anyone know a pole vault? Nobody even knows a pole vaulter. This guy's 84 and excels at the pole vault. The Okinawans mostly grow their own food. They eat more, but they weigh less. They eat a lot of tofu, a lot of veggies, a lot of plant-based foods that are high in nutrition but low in calories. For Serie Toguchi, he is enjoying many elements of longevity. He is enjoying sunshine, fresh air. He's outside in his garden. He's getting exercise, hoeing and weeding, and he's taking a little nap. I don't know if you can tell, but he's actually closed his eyes here, and he's resting in the sunshine and in the fresh air. But of course, the interviewer doesn't ask him about the other elements. He says, Mr. Toguchi, why the red gloves? And Toguchi says, they're easy to find. True story. The Okinawans also have something called a moai, which is a group of people who get together and help one another. Not just as a social sort of club, but it's financially help each other, spiritually help each other, emotionally help each other. But unfortunately, Okinawa is losing its longevity edge. Okinawa now has the highest rate of obesity in all of Japan. And a lot of that is their move away from traditional values and diet, and it's the fall of modern civilization. The goal what country? Does anyone remember? Not Greece, but Greece is one of the blue zones. Very good. Oh, Ikaria. Ikaria is the island. You should go like this. And my Italian friends, no, don't do that. That means we're upset at you. Don't do that. That's an actually angry. This is like, da, 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 da. That's a bad thing, right? So Silanus is a village giant meal. How many of you get together with all your relatives even once a year? Laws of science is usually who lives longer, men or women. Reach 100 from men to women is 1 man for every 4 women because women live longer. Life is very helpful, but they often wonder if it could be this thing because that's going to shorten his longevity for sure. But his thinking is different than the average American. The interviewer with Giuseppe asked him, it says, day, then I'd be sick. Isn't that kind of the opposite in Western society? Most of the time, we don't burn out, we rust out. And quercetin in them than the mainland Italian grapes. And those are powerful antioxidants that combat heart disease. Who's ever heard of the French paradox in the scientific literature? So what is the French paradox? Can you explain it? Well, that's the thing, is that the French, they eat cheese, they eat all this saturated fat, they eat animal products. So why is it that their heart disease is so much lower than the United States? And the answer is? Yeah, they drink wine. So that's the reason why they feel that these French have a lot less heart disease. But what they didn't realize, and interestingly enough, it was researchers at my alma mater in Stanford that showed that it wasn't the alcohol, it was the antioxidants in the red wine and in the white wine is where you get the resveratrol and the quercetin. That is the benefit. But you can get that from the grapes themselves, right? You don't have to drink the wine because the alcohol is actually, when you look within the last 5 to 10 years, they've done studies. Now to give you an idea, alcohol calories per gram. Anyone but my wife, because I know my wife knows that. 9 is for fat. That's not correct. Is fat. Alcohol 7. 7 calories per gram. So to give you an idea, 100 grams of alcohol, people who drank less than 100 grams per week still had shortened longevity. They shortened their lifespan by about half a year compared to people who didn't drink at all. So that's an interesting concept. The French paradox is basically, why don't they have more heart disease? Because they eat a lot of saturated fat, they eat animal products, but the argument they felt was because of their red and white wine. But now that's actually been debunked as far as the alcohol. It's the actual components of the grapes that give you the advantage. Now they don't recommend that people drink. Even now, have you ever heard of Mayo Clinic? Anyone heard of Mayo Clinic? So Mayo Clinic puts out a wellness letter regularly, and they don't recommend alcohol for anyone under 50 years old. So they do recommend that you avoid that. The WHO, do you know how much alcohol they recommend? Woo! The WHO? None. How did you know that? That's very good. They do recommend none. The WHO recommends 0 alcohol. But what's interesting with Sardinia is 80% of them are directly related to the original inhabitants of the island. So they think it's a genetic incubator. To give you an idea of what genetic incubator means is that if you're on an island, which is kind of an isolated area, you tend to marry, have kids with who? Your own people, the people on the island, right? So you're not like getting other diversities in the gene pool, if that makes sense. Also, obesity affects 10% of Sardinians, even more now. This is an old statistic. Does anyone know what percent of Americans are obese? Obese means 20% or greater than your ideal body weight. So in other words, if your ideal body weight is 150 pounds, that means you weigh 180 pounds. So, because 20% of 150, that makes sense? So what percent of Americans are 70, wow, no, not that many. I'm thankful it's not that bad. Yet, 42%. But your statistic is correct if you use the definition of overweight. If overweight is greater than 10%, so you're supposed to be 150 pounds. I use 150 pounds because from a standpoint, the average, it's the 70 kilogram man. I don't know if you've heard that saying, those of you who are from South Africa and other places. The 70 kilogram man is kind of the standard, the average. So that's 150 pounds. So if you're 150 pounds, 10% would be 165. So you're greater than 165 pounds. So that's 10% overweight, right? So also the other criticism for Sardinia is there's only 2,400 of them. In science, what do we like as far as numbers? Big numbers, right? We want big numbers because that's more statistically significant than smaller numbers. Now, sometimes you don't need big numbers to see a difference if it's dramatic, if it's like absolutely crazy obvious. But I'll give you one example. What is the only safe medication you can give to a pregnant woman when she's pregnant, like for pain? Anyone know? It's an over-the-counter medication. Tylenol, not aspirin. Aspirin's dangerous, actually. Marijuana. That was good. So Tylenol is considered a category A for pregnant women, which means generally recognized as safe, until recently. Who's aware of what Tylenol causes in utero now? Is anyone aware? Just recently, like the last year or so. Anyone know? I'll give you a hint. It begins with A and ends with D. And the letter in between is D. ADD, that's right, ADHD, that's correct. So if you use Tylenol during pregnancy, your children have an increased risk of ADD, ADHD, and autism. Did you know that? Yes. And so now there's this big lawsuit against Tylenol and stuff like that. But that was harder to detect, right? Because it was a subtle sort of thing. And it took a long period of time for them to discover it. So what I try to tell people, if something is harmful for you when you're really small, like a baby, it probably is not good for you as an adult. But it's not as obvious. Do you remember when they said pregnant women should only eat 3 cans of tuna a month? Who remembers that when they used to say that? And then they went from 3 cans to 2 cans, then from 2 cans to 1 can. Do you know how much tuna they recommend for pregnant women now? 0. Why? The mercury. The mercury affects the brain development. But people say, oh, it's such a good source of protein. Right? So as an adult, they say, oh yeah, I eat plenty of tuna. I do that all the time. But why, if it's harmful for you in utero, does it suddenly become healthy for you later? Same thing with alcohol. If you saw a pregnant woman taking a swig, what would you think? She doesn't know the truth, right? But somehow alcohol is good for you as an adult? Doesn't that seem funny, right? So that's what I share with people, is if you're not sure if something's good or bad for you, look at the literature that's in utero, things that are affecting a child inside its mother's womb. And you can get a clue sometimes of what things are more dangerous than others. But what about me? I don't live in the country. This is my quest. I went and I traveled to places of longevity. This is me actually in, what country am I in? Who knows? Costa Rica, that's correct. Nicoya, Costa Rica, right? Nicoya, Costa Rica we are one of the 5 blue zones now. And so we've named Sardinia, we've named Okinawa, our head elder here has named Ikaria, Greece, and this is Nicoya in Costa Rica. They are one of the 5, and they want to preserve that area of longevity. But my wife just told me recently what's happening. They're also losing their edge. And I'm like, no, this is terrible. Because I went there and I interviewed a lady. Of course, her name is Maria, right? And does anyone know, by the way, what the most popular name is in the world? It's not Maria. Nope. It's not an English name. Muhammad is correct. That is correct. Number 1 name in the world is Muhammad. But I'm pretty sure that after that, it's probably Maria or something like that, right? John, right? I think you mentioned that. Sorry, what did you say? Jesus, yeah, sure, that's a common name. But I interviewed Maria, and I remember calling her, and I said, listen, hey, would you like us to bring you anything to eat? She said, sure, if you can. What would you like? She's like, just bring me anything. And I said, well, what time would you like us to come? Just come anytime. She was literally saying that. And here I am interviewing her, and I said, would you like me to feed you? She says, no, I'll feed myself. She was turning 107. She was turning 107 that year. I said, I'm turning 50. She's turning more than double. Incredible. And I learned so many things from Maria. It was such a blessing to meet her and interview her. This longevity zone actually has the worst air quality in the United States. It's in smoggy, Southern California. In fact, Paula, our hostess, she told me that some of the smoke comes up from California. Did you know that? It's so bad. Now, these happy seniors are not in the country. They are not generally growing their own food. This is one of their champions, Marge Jatan. She was filling up her car, and hopefully she won't eat the stuff on the sign here or drink the stuff on the sign, but she was 100 years old and she renewed her driver's license. Would you like to be on the road with someone who is 100 plus years old? Would that be a little bit nerve-wracking maybe? But you know what the funny thing is? They had to renew it only for 5 years. They said, Mrs. Jatan, we are not going to renew it for 10 years. We're only going to give you 5. She came back at 105 and renewed it again. Did you know that? She was a nurse, and she was actually married to a physician who lived until 98. So he did not live longer than Marge, but he did a good job. He did a good job. Here is a physician, though. This is Frank Shearer, MD. At 100 years old, at the time of the writing of the article, he was the oldest water skier on planet Earth. Anyone know a water skier? Raise your hand if you know anyone who's a water skier. Okay, how old are they? Teens? How old is your water skier that you know? Do you know a water skier? I saw you raise your hand, or someone raise their hand back there. No, maybe you're just fixing your hair. Okay.
And me.
Oh, good for you. So you're a water skier? Yeah. How old are you, if you don't mind my asking?
78.
Good for you. Praise the Lord Jesus. So this gentleman at 100 years old has outlived the average physician by several decades. But I want to share with you, not just a physician, but one of my professors from school. This is none other than Wareham, MD. Being in the operating room with this man who at 91 years old was still performing open heart surgery. Be comfortable with the head surgeon being 91. No. Wouldn't you worry that maybe he wasn't very steady? But I promise you, Dr. Wareham's hands were rock solid steady. But that wasn't the most impressive thing about Dr. Wareham. The most impressive thing when I was a medical student was that Dr. Wareham never got excited. He never raised his voice or got upset in the OR. Whenever there was a complication, he would just say stuff like, ligate here, suction there, cut here. It just kind of just give directions. And I asked him, I said, how in the world is this guy, this is life and death. This is like heart surgery we're doing here. And I said, how in the world is Dr. Wareham so calm? And the charge nurse told me, quite frankly, Dr. Wareham has been doing open heart surgery for longer than all of us have been alive. And he's seen the complications already. He already knows what the complications are and what to do for each one of them. Very impressive. Is Lydia Newton. At 112, at the time, she was among the oldest 20 people on the face of the earth. The article says, intriguing is that the Seventh-day Adventists come from all races and walk. For some reason, they live a long time. What's even most intriguing about Seventh-day Adventists is when they've looked at people who become Seventh-day Adventists. For example, the African American community has a much higher risk of hypertension, diabetes. That's been recognized for many years. But when they join the Adventist church, those risks, it's incredible. And this is, of all of the blue zones, the longevity zones that we've talked about so far, is the only zone that is not losing its edge. Yes. So let's kind of combine all the ones we've learned. They mostly have plant-based diets, traditionally don't smoke, traditionally don't drink, with the exception of probably red wine, white wine. They're family-oriented, and they have daily physical activity. This is Newsweek, not a religious article. This is an old article, and they give kind of a little flow chart on how to live forever. The first one, you are female. But the second one, I must confess, I put the giant red arrow there. It says you are a what? Seventh-day Adventist. Wow. Right? There's other stuff like flossing. Your mom was young when she had you. But I want you to look at this little thing, the apple. Do you see the apple right here? Who sees the apple? What does that say? No, after age 6. It doesn't say at age 6. It says after age 6, right? It says after. You said at. That's not what it says. I can't see it even from here, but I know what the chart says. And it says after. Has anyone ever read the book Better Late Than Early? What is it talking about? Raymond Moore. Raymond C. Moore. Doctorate of Education. What was he advocating for? Homeschooling when? Late? Yes, later. Most people would say your kid doesn't start learning till 6, 7, 8. You're way behind. Have you ever heard people say that? We start our kids at 4, at 3, right? They're actually going to school like pre-kindergarten. I'm serious. There's some societies in Japanese society, it's competitive to get into the right kindergarten. I'm serious, it is. But this shows that longevity, mind you, this is not a chart on education. This is a chart on what? Phenomena. If your child starts formal schooling later, they will live longer. That's crazy. Ellen White, the prophet of your church. One of the many reasons why I am a Seventh-day Adventist is because you just a phenomena of learning. This is a phenomena of living. Do you realize that? Living. Let's take a look at U.S. News and World Reports. Again, this is not a religious publications, it's secular. How to live to be 100. Number 1, those who retire expire. Yes, don't retire. What I think to people is this. I work with a lot of elderly populations. I work with the senior citizens all. They're in great health because to help others. Does that make sense? Who dedicate their lives to unselfish effort for the good of others are most surely working out their own salvation, but also health. Did you know that? When you give, you live. Yes, gardening, absolutely. So retiring, about flossing. But my answer to them is flossing is how hard to learn? Easy. It's easy. How expensive? That's 2 whole years different. And the thought process is, serious, what does it smell like? It smells like damaging that can be, right? So I tell people if you floss regularly, then you're, ladies, I apologize, I know you don't like that. But I mean, you could get floss easily, right? It's just a piece of string. Yeah, she just went back there. I saw her go like that. That was good. So that's true. So I accept flossing because it is in harmony with the principles of the messages of health. What do you think about me? Scam. Gotta be scam, right? Is this a Bitcoin? Is this like a what, right? Is there now challenging conventional wisdom? You remember supposed to step so many steps a day? What is it? Yeah, 10,000. Did you know that that's gone now? It's recently been challenged. And they find that when you increase, every time you step more, you gain more and more benefits. Because that means you're not like a board certified couch potato. You actually go and do stuff, you know. But a lot or a little. That's a tremendous amount. 600 minutes a week. So that's pretty intense, right, for the average person. And they found that those individuals lived 15 to this. When we go, right, I'll show you how you get time. Ready? When you go to the store, the average person will spend 5 minutes driving around to get to the parking space right next to it. But what you should do is just park and walk. So that's what I tell people is there's many ways, but exercise is really Jim Fixx. He was a big marathoner, right? How did he die? Know that? So it's not all just about exercise. Riddled with plaque. So what's the most important meal of the day? You regulate your blood sugar, not just for that meal, not just for that day, but you will live longer. Whole grains. A lot of people say no grains. Have you heard the people who say no grains, paleo, stuff like that, like fruits and meats and stuff like that, no dairy? Have you heard of that? But that's not what the literature shows. Does anyone know what food item is correlated? You raise your longevity up. And this is, to give you a hint, this is actually, there's a physician who's from, he's a cardiologist. Absolutely. And I'll give you another hint, lectins. That's gun. Is against what? What sort of articles of food are high in lectins? Beans. But did you know 2 tablespoons of beans, what happens to your longevity? 8% increase per. You realize that? Like beans and rice and beans, right? But most people don't understand this concept. They're chasing these fad diets, but the longevity edge is with the solid literature on these long-lived people groups, right? How many people sleep every night more than 6 hours? Raise your hand. Oh, okay, not everybody. Did you know that the most interesting thing has happened within the last 2 years? I asked an individual who is a PhD candidate, and I said, I want you to give me the latest on this particular disease process. And he says, I'm 5th author on the paper, but I'm going to give you the paper ahead of time. Very interesting. And does anyone know, I'll give you an example. Does anyone know what is risk factor now? Like I'll just start with the basic ones. Risk factors for heart disease. What's the big 4? Who remembers? That's unfortunate. I disagree with that. Like it took a long time after the big 4 for them to put alcohol on there, but alcohol eventually got on there. But most people are still stuck back in the French paradox. But they finally caught up with it. But the big 4 are high what? Blood pressure. High what else? High cholesterol, right? Sedentary lifestyle, then alcohol. Right? Recently, they looked at a study, and this was a PhD in cancer. Excuse me. It's sedentary lifestyle, obesity, then sleep. So they're still stuck back in the, only those people are moving away from it. Alcohol has not been put on the big list. So the big 7 are lifestyle, obesity, and sleep. Sleep is the big one. But
You can't always control.
really is imagine the situations where you get the best sleep. Working outside, yes. Or you go jacuzzi, that's good. Camping, right? So when you're camping, how much fresh air are you getting? Hey, thank you. So you're going to sleep early, you're getting plenty of fresh air. What have you also gotten during the day? Exercise, right? Almost zero. But is it totally quiet? No, you have what's called some kind of, they pay to have a waterfall, they pay to have the crickets chirping, they pay to have the frogs peeping, right? I'm telling you, this is serious. People like the white noise. Create those things. And amongst, are you sleeping amongst a bunch of artificial products or whatever? Interesting that he's brought that up. That's actually not part of this, but I'll get to it at the end of the presentation. So what's interesting is, what is our head right next to?
The window.
And what position is the window in?
Open.
And do we, like, in the evening time, what do we
Candles or warm lighting?
What's warm lighting?
It's not like the fluorescent lighting or the blue lighting, it's something that has a more warm tone to it, so it's.
Be like a bedside lamp, right? That kind of. So we actually shift, and that's why your phone has a setting. Did you know that? When you look, it says nighttime mode. Have you noticed that? It becomes like more blue. Is to not use your device before you're trying to go to bed, right? That's actually better. So sleep is not just quantity, but it's quality. And what's very interesting is when you sleep deeply, you are a different person. Now, one time you're probably going to stay up, right, a lot more would be your honeymoon, right? You're out there, you're partying, you're getting to know each other, you're married, you're happy. What time did we go to bed every night on our honeymoon?
8 p.m.
Oh, wow. Wait, 8 p.m.? Are you guys fuddy-duddies? Are you guys crazy? How did you feel during our honeymoon?
Like a new woman.
Like a new woman. Literally, we were going to sleep at 8 p.m. But did we go for our honeymoon?
Kauai,
And
Bali,
what time did the sun go down?
6 p.m.
So if the sun goes down at 6, it's easy to go to sleep, right? Because by 2 hours after sunset, is it light? Well, it's dark, right? Like here, it's hard because the sun doesn't go to bed until 8 something, right? I don't know, what is it 9 now? Oh, ouch. So it's hard to get to sleep early, right? But I tell people that before artificial lighting, what time do people go to bed? Shortly after, right? Shortly after. Like the chickens, sure, yeah, they would come to roost when it got dark, right? So if you sleep early, this is an amazing thing. If you are unconscious at 10 p.m., meaning like out, you're not awake at all, you're like unconscious at 10 p.m., your body produces a spike of repairing hormones that never appears during the rest of the night, no matter how long you sleep. So people say, oh, I'll just sleep in. It's not the same. It's not the same. And I'll tell you, your body is so, this is a serious thing. Sleep is so important. They actually did a study. This is actually over 10 years ago now. This is an old article in the journal Circulation. They found, when they looked at the United States, they found a spike in fatal heart attacks around the spring and the fall in every state of the United States, with the exception of Hawaii and Arizona. Over the baseline heart attack rate. What was it? The change of time. Remember spring forward, fall back? Yes. Did you know that they've known that those time changes affect fatal heart, like not just heart attacks. This was before they knew that it affected auto accidents, but that makes sense, right? I hope that makes sense. But that was the first time where they published that it was lethal for your heart to actually have that time change. Your body doesn't like change, drastic change, or sudden change. In fact, if you go to sleep 3 hours later than normal, you will cut your natural killer function in half for 3 days. Natural killers are your immune cells. They specifically destroy cancer cells. And if you do that, it costs you. Like if you do the whole, hey, let's stay up till midnight and kiss each other, right? Let's go to sleep early, right? Instead, and have a romantic morning instead, or something like that. That's what I say. Because if you stay up those 3 hours, because let's say you normally go to bed at 9, right? If you stay up till midnight, that's cutting your immune system, one of the branches of your immune system, in half for 3 days, right? But what do most people do if they're tired in the morning? They said, I don't have to worry about being tired in the morning. I just get a coffee, right? But did you know that when you drink 1 serving of a caffeinated beverage, just 1 serving, you cut your natural melatonin production in half for 72 hours. And how many people drink 1 caffeinated beverage every 72 hours? No, yeah, right, exactly. They're going to drink 1 every day, right? They have a cup in the morning. And the thing is, though, is that when you look at caffeine consumption, there's positive things associated with it. When you have people who drink caffeine regularly, especially in the morning, they actually have a lower risk of colon cancer. But do you know what that's from? Yes, it is. Who said pooping? That's correct. So they drink a cup of coffee, and then what happens? They go to the bathroom. That's correct. That's so funny that you knew that. That's very good. So it stimulates peristalsis, so they actually have a bowel movement, so it doesn't just sit and sit and sit and sit and sit, right? So interestingly enough, it's not just the quantity of sleep, it's the quality of sleep. And I'm going to give you a little hint on how to tell if you're sleep deprived a little later. Number 6, hopefully this isn't rocket science, eat whole plant foods, right? But I'm going to just share an interesting study. This is an old study from Finland. They looked at smokers. And if you smoke, what are you going to get? Lung cancer, and what else? Heart disease, what else? Emphysema, right? So you're going to get a lot of things, but lung cancer is the common one. They looked at people who were smokers. The control group was just smoking. The experimental group, they smoked, but they ate foods that were high in vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, and selenium. And then they followed them. And then the third group, they ate the same amount of vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, and selenium in a supplement form. So the first group, the control group, they obviously developed cancer, some of them. Do you think that the food group got less cancer, more cancer, or the same cancer as the control group? Okay, do you think that the supplement group got the same cancer, less cancer, or more cancer than the control group? They got more. And they had to stop the study prematurely and say, don't take these supplements. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case with all studies, but I'm just saying that the best way to be getting food is from the foods. The nutrition needs to be get from the food itself. Does anyone know that they stopped putting certain things into multivitamins? Who knew this? Is anyone aware of this? There's a certain mineral they took out of all multivitamins now. I'll give you a hint. It was what was killing kids who would overdose. This particular mineral is lethal in overdoses. The Flintstones, no? But that's a mineral, that's good. Some people will say, like vitamin C, I'm like, that's not a mineral, that's a vitamin, right? But that is a mineral, but it's not. It's Flintstones. Actually, a lot of these kids ate a bunch of Flintstones. Iron. They don't supplement. They don't add iron to any multivitamin anymore. Did you know that? But now there's another one. And this is recent. Like, not that recent, but probably within the last 10 years. They don't put this mineral in anymore because they were finding it in coronary plaques. And this is a common mineral. Many women supplement. Calcium. How did you know that?
I know that they're saying not to take calcium.
No, you don't supplement it. How can you get your calcium? You can get it. Who said greens? Who said greens? Greens, yes, dark green leafy vegetables. Very good for calcium. Very excellent. So they're actually not supplementing multivitamins with iron anymore or with calcium because the riskiest coronary plaques are with calcium. But recently, within the last 2 months, they found something else in coronary plaques that's even riskier than calcium. But I'll get to that in a minute. Oh, I heard it in the back. You knew! So also, number 7, it's not always what you're eating, but what's eating you, right? So that's very important. Have you ever heard of type A personality? Who's heard of type A personality? Right? They're a go-getter, they're the executive, they're on time, they're organized, they're ambitious, but there's 2 qualities of the type A personality that causes them to die prematurely. Anyone want to wager what it was? Hostility, not road rage, but just hostility in general. Hostility, right? Remember, vengeance is whose? Saith the Lord. Because you and I, it kills us, right? It kills us. So they've found that if you lose your temper for even a second, your risk of fatal heart attack goes up 300 to 400% for the next 3 hours. And it's not even related to the adrenaline and other hormones. It's directly related to the episode. That's what they found. What's the other personality trait that is not just hostile, not related to hostility, but it's similar, right? But it kills you? Intolerance, actually. So it's one thing for you to have ideals, but if you are hating or harsh or mean to people who don't share those ideals, intolerance, right? There's many people who disagree with me on a lot of things, but I love them, right? My patients, how many of my patients do you think live their lifestyle different than me? All of them, right? That's the whole point, right? All of them are living differently than me. But do I hate my patients? I love my patients. I'm there for my patients, right? That's why I go to work in the morning, is to try to help people, right? So that they don't suffer a premature death or have disabling disease, right? So intolerance is actually a lethal sort of trait in the type A personality. Also, I want to share with you that I have to confess that number 8 I modified. In the article it says live like a Seventh-day Adventist, but I'm just going to invite the whole world, all our audiences, all of you can be a Seventh-day Adventist. Please, you're welcome. There's plenty of room. We're a small denomination, plenty of room in these pews. Fill it up to capacity, right? We'll get to that a little bit later. Number 9, a creature of habit. Have you ever noticed that people who are old, they get up, they go to sleep, they eat, they exercise all at the same times, right? They have a very good routine. Very, very solid, very, very stable routine. Number 10, anyone have a sister? Raise your hand if you have a sister. Now raise your hand if you have a close relationship with that sister. Raise your hand. Okay. If you have a close relationship with your sister, you will have less lifetime depression and you will live longer. Now, why that didn't work out with brothers, I'm not so sure. Maybe we don't listen as well, maybe we're not as empathetic, but the study was on sisters. But what I'm trying to say is that connections are very important. Now, you may have to go outside of your family for those connections, right? You may have family members that are very toxic for you. But you know what the Bible promise is? That he who commits himself to the kingdom of God, if he loses father or mother or husband or wife, shall gain 100-fold. Fathers and mothers, husbands, wives, with persecutions, right? And in the realm to come, eternal life. So I can tell you, how many different moms and dads have I introduced to you so far in my life?
More than the normal?
Who's the ones that are on a cruise right now?
Our godparents.
Our godparents,
In Washington.
right? He's an OBGYN surgeon, she's a nurse. And then the ones in Tennessee?
Right, there's those two.
Okay, the dentist and also the
There's
dietitian.
Grandma and Grandpa in Indiana.
Grandma and Grandpa in Indiana, yeah. Not related to me.
Yeah.
How often do we hear from Grandma?
Like every Sabbath.
Every Sabbath she sends us a little message, even though she's not related to me at all.
We have sisters and brothers in Christ.
Exactly, that's right. So that's important to stay connected, right? Do you know what we realized during the pandemic? There was a risk factor that was as lethal as smoking 1 pack of cigarettes a day. Do you know what it was? The mask. Who said isolation? That is correct. Isolation and loneliness is as risky as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. You know, even if you have to tell someone, hey, let's go out to eat, my treat. Let's go for a walk, whatever. Connect with people. That's so important. So important. Number 11, who remembers the marshmallow study? Who can tell me the marshmallow study? Raise your hand if you can tell me what the marshmallow study was all about. Go ahead.
So there's 2 marshmallows. I mean, you can have 2 marshmallows, but otherwise there's just one there, and they had to look at it. I don't remember.
They were little. They were like little toddler sort of kids, like small. Like old enough to understand the instructions, but that's pretty much it. So she's exactly right. So the researcher played in front of that child and said, but if you wait until I come back, I will give you another one. That's correct. Now these kids had to wait for 15 minutes. Now mind you, for that child who's like 2 or whatever, 15 minutes is like you waiting 9 hours for the person to come back. I ain't gonna do this. You know what I mean? And many of the kids, what do you think they did? They ate the marshmallow. Now some waited for a time, but then eventually They ate the marshmallow, and a very few of the children waited until they came back, and they enjoyed their 2 marshmallows. And they followed these children for 40 years. And they found that the ability to resist the marshmallow, and even the time that they resisted, even those who eventually ate it, was directly correlated to every measure of success that you can think of in life. No divorce, no jail time, academic success, financial success, SAT scores were correlated to it. The ability to defer the immediate gratification for the long-term goal was associated with everything good in life. And when they looked at these kids who had resisted, they looked at a personality trait in them, and they found that the one most correlated to longevity was conscientiousness. What does conscientiousness mean? Well, it means saying what you mean, weaning your workout. It's not 1, 2, skip a few, 8, 9, 10, right? You actually keep this is not the same as being positive. Like someone who's very positive might say, oh, that's just a mole, but I never get it checked out, but I've had it checked out by a dermatologist already because I'm surrounded by colleagues in medicine, so it's very easy for me, thankfully. So, and they said, no, that's benign, that's a normal nevus or mole, right? But if I was just positive, I'd never have things checked out, and maybe that's not a good idea, right? All right, let's take a look at our coaching ministry. Ashley and I have something called Only Longevity. And you can go to it, onlylongevity.org. You can take a look at it. You can schedule times where you can talk to us personally. But our acronym of the remedies of longevity is found very simply in eternal life. Number 1, election. What your calling is, right? I'm a speaker, I'm a physician, I'm a teacher, right? So those things I do and have to practice on a regular basis. And whatever your election is, whether it's being a mother, whether it's being a wife, whether it's being a husband, whether it's being a student, whether it's being a plumber, a carpenter, right? Practice your election every day, your calling in life every day. Also, election is choosing the good and using it judiciously and refusing the bad completely. Trust in the Creator is T, but I want to show you how I can improve your hormonal profile instantly. What I want you to do is the person next to you, come over to them and just hold their hand. Just hold their hand. Did you know that you can increase your oxytocin immediately by doing that? Did you know that if you were to have a 20-second hug with someone you love or a 6-second kiss, you increase the levels of oxytocin highly significantly? How many people are aware of the 6-second kiss and the 20-second cuff? You heard that too. So touch, very important. Does recently found that increases your cause of death from any cause by 450%. If not, know where it's coming from? Come on, right? And the thing is, I challenge you on this. If you would like to know and to challenge yourself, no water, we're out of water. Can you grab me that bottle that's been sitting in the back window for the last 6 months? And when you open, oh, is that what you said? That's nasty. That's true though, you're right. So that's the thing, is who had microplastics in those plaques, they took samples from the carotid, which would cause, so they looked at those, and if you had the microplastics, not everybody did, but about half of them, that's a serious signal. That's not a joke, right? Right? Toxins can be a very big issue in people's lives. Toxins, all right? So toxins would be to avoid things that are harmful. I'll give you $100. Name them. Go ahead. She's got her hand up. Go ahead. No, go ahead. So urine, poop, skin, mucus. Secretions, saliva, secretions, I'm going to count that under secretions. Yeah, you're continually giving her hints. She can hear you. I can hear you. I can hear you from up here. I could hear you. When I was here, you said, who has time for that? I heard you. Pulmonary. So she's correct. Pulmonary, hepatic, and circulatory. Those are the 7 ways we throw off toxins. Hepatic is liver. Your liver detoxes stuff, right? So that's the reason why people put fomentations over the liver to try to get it to work more. That's their rationale behind it. I don't know if you've heard of people who use coffee enemas sometimes and they have you lay on your right side. But I'm not saying I do coffee enemas, but I'm just saying that's their thought process because they want to stimulate the liver activity. So you got it. So urinary, gastrointestinal, skin, right? Secretions, pulmonary, hepatic, and circulatory. Those are the 7 methods of detox that our body generally uses. So exercise, we talked about. They don't enjoy it? No. Injury. Number 1 reason why people keep exercising. A friend. Because if Susie Q is waiting for you to go on your 6 a.m. walk, you're not going to hit snooze as easily. Does that make sense? But if it's just you by yourself, right? It's easy to hit the snooze, right? So it's accountability, correct? So exercise. You mentioned earthing. Very interesting. So how often do I earth, babe? Every day. Very interesting that you should say that. For as long as possible. For as long as possible. I'll sit and have my devotions on the earth, you know? And so I'll sit on something that contacts me. And there's very little literature on this. There's like a team in the Tour de France. Does anyone know what the Tour de France is? Bicycle, right? And they actually had these grounding sort of devices, and they had no injuries on their team. They didn't win, though. So, but interestingly enough, the concept with earthing is that your body is constantly developing what's called free radicals and changing charge. But what is the sink of electrons? The bank of electrons? The earth, right? Because it has a weakly negative charge, right? So when you contact it with either grass or wet sand or grounding, sand, stuff like that, you're kind of resetting the charge, if that makes sense. I'm surprised that you said that.
Our pillow into our socket.
Really? The grounding.
Silver lining to our.
Oh, that's interesting. So you have that's very interesting. Some of my friends have grounding blankets, but I use actually the ground itself. I'll take questions at the end.
No,
Yes.
I was going to say they sell shoes now.
Yeah, that are grounding. Interesting.
You might get ticks.
You might get what?
Ticks.
Oh, ticks or thorns. I could get thorns in the bottom of my foot too. Yeah. No, I don't want that to happen either. Like if I'm in a place where it's like hookworm or something like that, I'm not going to be doing it in those areas.
I don't understand what you mean by earthing.
Oh, you don't have to walk barefoot. Like people were saying, like Lumi brings a good point. You don't want to get thorns or ticks, right? So you can just sit on wet sand or the grass. You don't have to walk. You can just sit, right? So it's interesting that you mentioned earthing, yes. So rest, how can you tell if you're sleep deprived? There's 3 ways. Well, tired is kind of obvious, right? But there are 3 ways. Do you have to use an alarm clock to get up?
No.
Do you always remember your dreams?
Sometimes.
And do you sleep in more than 90 minutes on your day off?
No.
So if the answer to any of those questions is yes, you're sleep deprived. No, wait, if the answer to the first question is like, yes, I always remember my dreams, that's good. Number 2 was, do I need the alarm clock? Yes, then they're sleep deprived. And the other one is, do I sleep in more than 90 minutes? Yes, then that's a problem. Does that make sense? So that's an easy way to figure out if you are sleep deprived. So routine, do the same thing at the same time if you possibly can. And nutrition, we talked about. Who has heard of forest bathing? Who knows what forest bathing is? Wow, you know forest bathing. What's a country where they're implementing that?
I don't know, but we've done it. We've gone for it.
Yeah. Japan. Japan, they're making sure that there are forests every so many square kilometers for people to walk through. And they've found that it is not just a phenomena of exercise. It's actually being in the forest. It's healing in and of itself. So nature, well, there's 3 trees that she actually identifies. Do you know which trees? Pine, cedar, correct. Last? Fir. Fir. Pine, cedar, fir. There you go. That's why you guys are doing so well, right? Phenomenal. Negative ions, sure. So nature. Also, did you know that music is healing or potentially harmful?
Yes.
Anyone know about a recent scientist who was looking at the freezing of water with music? Yes, very interesting. Very interesting. But they've done experiments on music even before this. There was rats who were trying to solve a race. And do you know what music was most effective for helping them? Which particular classical composers, though? Mozart, Bach, correct. Beethoven, correct. Vivaldi, correct. Wow, you guys are all over it. I am very impressed. This is like the probably the most correct audience I've ever had, and you guys are a small group. That's pretty incredible. So notes, yes. Air, not just the quality, but the quantity and the type, right? Who has heard of a very good. Humming. That's so good. Do you know how you... Just breathe through your nose. Just breathe through your nose. And how do you get that idea? When God created you, He breathed where? Into your nostrils. The what? Did He breathe it into your mouth? No, He breathed into your nostrils. Breathing through your nose. Did you know that? Isn't that funny? And you'll feel actually warmer, because you'll get vasodilation of your arteries. Breathing in and out. That's nitrous oxide. You're saying nitrous, that's laughing gas. Nitric oxide is what I said, not nitrous oxide. So it's very important. There's a differentiation there, right? But nitrous is the laughing gas that the dentist gives you so that you're like this, so they can do the dental procedure, stuff like that. So yes, good point. But I didn't say nitrous, I said nitric oxide. Yeah, difference. There is difference. So air, right? But also attitude is very important. How you view something. Is the glass half or, right? So looking at the attitude, here's the best thing for your attitude. You may not know all of the chapters, but you know the end of the book already.
Amen.
That's the beauty of it, right? Even though you know things are going to be tough, right? Much tougher than they are now. You know what the last chapter is, right? God wins. That's the end of the book, right? Stay on His side. Don't leave, right? So air, attitude, light, not just sunlight, but using correct light at the correct times. Have you ever heard of the box? People who look at the box? No, not TV. That's actually correlated to destructive things in your health. Like they look at a box, a light box. Who's ever heard of that? Yeah. What do they do that for? That's for depression. Did you know that? But do you know how you can get the same thing? Watch a sunrise. Did you know that the light in the morning does exactly? Yes, you already knew that. That's so great. Fantastic. You guys are all over this. Everything I mentioned, at least one of you is like, you know. That's very good. So also learning. Learning is another important L. Learning is another important L. So remember what I talked about is if you're learning constantly, you're protecting yourself from what? Memory loss, Alzheimer's. Learning, but there's also another L called language. Did you know that Emoto didn't just look at music, but he looked at words? Did you know that? Very interesting. Emoto is a Japanese businessman, actually, who looked at the molecular structure of how water freezes under different circumstances, like music playing, classical versus rock, but even the words, like saying child, goodness, love, faith, murder, like things like, he used very contrasting sort of things. It's very, very interesting what he found. And I think there may be something to that, but there's not a lot of data. Some people think he's not even a scientist. He's just a businessman. This is totally quackery. A lot of people throw him out. But I think it's something to think about and something to possibly explore more. But language is another thing that we haven't even put up here yet. Language.
And body language.
Body language, like 80%, right? Did you know that I can, like, what are men always wanting more of to keep them stronger? What hormone? Testosterone. Do you know I can increase your testosterone? Come right here. I'll show you. I'll increase your testosterone in 1 second. Ready? I want you to take the Wonder Woman pose. Just go like that. Do you know your testosterone goes up immediately? Just right. Just right. When you take a position like this, this is a position of pose. Did you know that? And just holding increases testosterone. Just holding your body like that increases testosterone. It's unbelievable. I also wanted to share that even though there's lots of remedies, they've missed what I feel is the most powerful remedy on this entire chart. What your prophet said. She says virtue, comma, the healing power of love was in all of Christ's miracles. Did you know that? An acronym like New Start or whatever, have they ever put love in it? I've never seen people do that. But love is so powerful. In fact, for some people, it's their most powerful remedy. When we looked at my hairs, when we started doing a hair assay, 80% of the hairs that turned from gray to black, what date could we trace it back to?
December 3rd.
That is my power area, is love between the woman that I love. That is so powerful as far as healing. But it's not love, but it's be loved. Love others unselfishly. Whenever we go to the lounge at our layovers in the airport and there's somebody struggling to get in, what do I routinely do for them?
You introduce yourself and say, would you like to be my guest?
And I don't even know the person. But I've introduced myself, so I do know the person. And I let them in. And do I try to charge them or try to do whatever? Do I try to force them to accept a tract?
No.
I just do it.
You don't even make them sit with us.
No, exactly. So I do it just to help them because I can bring in guests, right? But that's the thing, is to do something from unselfish love every day for the people around you.
Dr. Sang Lee used to call it love taunts.
Yes, Dr. Sang Lee was one of my mentors. That's a very bittersweet memory for me because, of course, he's left the church, as you're aware, probably right now. Yes, Dr. Sang Lee was one of my mentors, but unfortunately he fell away from our people. And I pray that he comes back by God's grace before the end. What she's referring to is there's something like a light energy. It's called a photon, right? So he believed that there was energy in love itself. So that's why he called it a love-ton instead of a photon. Just for those of you who aren't familiar with the photon concept. But yes, I will definitely pray for him. I've kind of brought him to my mind. Another L, I should say, with the second L, love and be loved. Another of the remedies is, who knows about cold plunge? What does cold plunge do for you? It does a lot of things. Blood flow increase, absolutely. That's number one. It changes circulatory patterns. What else does it do? Huge immune system booster. What else? Yes, cold plunge. Yes, cold plunge, yes. So what is about 5 minutes from our house?
Puget Sound.
The Puget Sound. And what temperature is the Puget Sound all year round?
40 degrees.
40 degrees. So I go and I do 5 kilometers on the beach, right? So I'm getting exercise, fresh air, sunshine. What else? Air. What else? Grounding. And then what do I do at the end of those 5 kilometers? I jump into the Puget Sound. For how long? For how long?
10 minutes.
6 minutes, actually. What, an hour in 40 degrees? That's called hypothermia, brother. But I think you could work up to that. But I try to do 6 minutes. I actually have Bible verses that I've memorized, and it takes me 10 minutes, 6 minutes to go through all of them. So instead of just freezing and like thinking about how cold it is, I just think about the memorization, right? So ice, like cold and drinking water, right? Integrity, very important. A clear conscience is so healing for your body. Like some people, I was talking to someone here who's not a believer in our church. They're actually a friend of ours. And they said, one of the things I find with Adventists is they're not secure about their salvation.
That's right.
And what I tell people is that that's why I gave Ashley the message that I did. Those who unselfishly dedicate themselves to the good of others are most surely working out their own salvation. Another is a sermon that Ellen White wrote, and that's important. Like if people have something bothering their conscience, then take care of it, right? That's what God says. If you come, very, very important. Very, very important. So, intimacy, very, very important and powerful. Like guys, they're like, man, how do I get this girl to fall for me? How do I and to be open with her? Because that's not just honesty, but that's intimacy. And not just talking about the good, but the challenges in your life. You know, the way guys can get women to watch football with them, I'm not saying you should watch football, but they'll say, you see that guy? He just is going through a divorce right now. He just lost custody of his daughter. She's like, oh, really? And they're going to be right in. I'm serious. I'm just telling you. That's how it works. That's how we work, okay? So intimacy isn't just sexuality in growth hormone and immunoglobulins when you're intimate, but it doesn't work of intimacy within the confines of what God's word says. Now, but that doesn't. I'm just saying that those types of studies reveal the design, if that makes sense, of our bodies and of our psyches, really. We talked about family and friends, right? We talked about being connected. Who has heard about fasting? Oh, wow. Anyone seen the study from USC just recently came out? I think three or 4 months ago. They looked at 72 hours of fasting. Do you know what that does? It doesn't mess you up. Who has heard of stem cells? Who's heard of stem cells? Platelet-rich plasma, has anyone heard of that? They're trying to use stem cells to regrow hair, to rebuild cells, right? So the thing is, do you know how you increase your circulating pool of stem cells? Refeed, your body goes through the roof in production of stem cells. It's unbelievable. It's very, very helpful. Water fast. But I'm just saying, work with your physician. Some of you may be diabetic or have other health things, but don't do fasting unless you are experienced with doing it. The best way that most people could fast is to skip which meal? Dinner, that's it. So eat breakfast, eat lunch, and I would say, do you know what the timing is for eating? 5 to 6 hours. So if you're eating breakfast at 7, when are you eating lunch? No later than 1. That's correct. Who said that? That's right. Correct. So 5 or 6 hours. Can you think of somebody who said to space your meals out 5 or 6 hours? Incredible. But that gives you how many hours of intermittent fasting? 18 hours, right? 17, 18 hours. So fasting increases your circulating pool. And I'm going to give you some cutting edge stuff that we've just had recently adding to our remedies, okay? Another F is flora. Do you remember we talked about flora, right? Yeah, who remembers gut flora when we talked about that? What is one thing that's favorable to your gut flora?
Animals when you're a child.
Yes. Does anyone know what prebiotics are? Fiber, right? Fiber is prebiotics because that's what your gut can digest and eat on, right? It's not absorbed. Your gut can go after it, right? Anyone know what probiotics are? What's a probiotic? not quite enzymes, but probiotics are, I'll give you an example. If you look at all cultures have a probiotic food. Okay, I'll give you an example for my cultures. I'm Chinese, I'm German. So German would be like sauerkraut, right? For Chinese, it would be like shodofu, like stinky tofu, right? Japanese, miso. Korean, kimchi, right? Does that make sense? Middle Eastern, kefir, right? English, yogurt. Yeah, so it's basically a fermented food. So when I give a prescription for antibiotics, what do you think I tell every single patient? I also tell them, eat a fermented food. Do you know how I determine what to tell them to eat? What's their nationality? That's correct. I say, what nationality are you? They, oh, well, I'm this, you know. I'm Japanese. I say, well, do you like natto? Oh, I haven't had natto for a long time. I said, have natto every day that you're on the antibiotics and for the next 2 months. And the reason why we say that is even a short course of antibiotics wipes out not just the bad guys, but the good guys. For the next 2 months, you don't recover. Did you know that people who go into the OR for surgery sometimes donate their own blood ahead of time?
Yes.
So that they can receive a what if they start bleeding? A compatible transfusion. Do you know what some people are doing now? They're donating their own stool. Who's heard of stool transplants?
Yes.
Wow, one person. Oh, you've actually heard it too. Oh, a few. Wow, interesting. So Flora, this is cutting edge. This is cutting edge. I have not put this onto the website yet, but there is things that you can do to alter your flora. Did you know that? In a favorable way. Your gut flora and just flora in general is very, very important. So another F that I wanted to share with, and this is also cutting edge, is fibers. Fibers. When I go to work, do you know what I usually wear for my work uniform? Anyone know? Scrubs, right? But do you know what those scrubs are made of? 100%. Well, I actually, when we did our engagement pictures, 100% linen. I had an outfit that was 100% linen. But it's interesting you mentioned bamboo fibers. I have socks that are made of bamboo fibers. That's interesting. But I don't choose those. Those are more expensive. But for my work outfit, I wear scrubs. And what are the scrubs made of? Cotton. 100% cotton. And also my undershirt, my boxers, and my socks. Do you know what those are all made of? Also 100% cotton. My suit, this is 100% wool. So fibers is I dress in one fiber. Do you know where I got that from? I got it from the Bible. That's correct. Now there's very little literature on this right now. Very, very little literature that I'm aware of. But let me tell you, it is hard to find.
Yes.
It is hard to find.
Especially wool.
And it's, yeah, so those are the three that I usually alternate with. I use wool suits. I use linen, which is flax. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but that's flax. Or I do cotton. Cotton's easiest, right? It's cheapest also. So that's the other F that we have not added here. So flora and also fibers. We have not added. And also the L was not only learning, but language. The words that you use are healing, right? Are healing or they're harmful. The Bible says life and death are in the tongue. Did you know that?
Yes.
Pleasant words are like apples of gold in pictures of silver. Healing words, right? So language is up there under the L. Fibers and flora is up on the F. And finally, this is probably the most important letter of everything is evaluate, okay? Evaluate. Now I'm going to prove to you that all of you know how to do this. Not every remedy is going to work the same for every person. You have areas of strength, and every one of us has at least one area that's a weak point. And we show you in our program how to strengthen your power areas and how to guard against your weak areas. So evaluate. Let me ask you this question. How can you tell if you are dehydrated? Raise your hand. How can you tell? So your skin turgor. Okay, what else? Your mouth is dry. Okay, what else?
Headache.
Headache. What else?
Eyes are dry.
Eyes are dry or mucous membranes are dry. What else?
Cramps.
Cramps in your, okay, cramps, very good, yeah?
Your pee smells.
Oh, your pee smells. Well, what about more obviously with your pee?
Color.
The color, right? And now I'm going to ask you the reverse. How can you tell that you are now well hydrated?
It's clear.
It's clear. So every one of you knows how to evaluate the category of ice and water. You all know how to evaluate your hydration status in a simple way that is a visual cue. And you even mentioned an olfactory cue, right? Your urine stinks, right? So you mentioned even olfactory cue. You mentioned a sensory cue. You can feel that your skin turgor is weaker, right? You actually can have your skin not bounce back as well. You mentioned a neurological symptom, headache, right? There's lots of things that you can do to evaluate yourself. This is so important for our health because not everyone is the same. So there are 3 things in my area that are the power areas for me. Number 1 for me, no question, is L, love. That is the most powerful healing area, and I will say that Ashley is the most healing influence that has come into my life in my entire existence. Hands down.
That's for everybody.
Well, but everyone feels love and expresses love differently, right?
That's right.
So that's not always the same. Like you've heard of the 5 love languages. I don't know if you guys have heard that, right?
It's still love.
Yeah, it's still love, but it's how people interpret it. But some people interpret love by getting a meal, right? Some people interpret love by a massage. Like people feel and express love differently depending on who they are. So my 3 power areas are love, right? Number 1. But number 2, what about 15%? Roughly 80% is from you, right? From her. 15% was from what things that were happening in my life?
Connecting with family members.
And these were long lost relatives that we had never met, right? When I connected with them, I saw about 15% of the gray hairs turning to black. What about 5% for me?
From purpose.
Is from purpose. What ikigai, so what particularly? I would just come back from what?
A campaign, a weekend like this.
A weekend like this where I had 12 decisions for baptism or something like that. That's tremendous, yeah. So those are my 3 power areas. Those are my 3 power areas. Now, I'm going to tell you that every one of you in this room has a check engine light. And what do I mean by check engine light? That means you have ways that your body warns you that there is something wrong. I will tell you what my check engine light is. Okay, you ready? Whenever I know I'm going to try to catch something, I have a digastric node that swells right here. Right under my chin, there's an area that can swell about the size of a pea. And I can see it if I look closely in the mirror. I can feel it. It's tender and it's enlarged. When I have that, I immediately know I need to take drastic measures. Also, another check engine light for me is my left lower eyelid will start going like this.
Yeah.
Involuntarily.
Yeah.
So I will get twitching in my left lower eyelid. But every one of you in this room has things like that. You have things that are warnings, that are warning signs. And Ashley and I will teach you how to evaluate every area of your life for your health. There was a friend of ours who has publicly put this online. She's a psychologist. And she was having a lot of gut issues. And I went to my wife and I said, I think that she's having malabsorption issues. And once we talked to her, we gave her some advice. She put a video on, and how was she feeling?
Better than in the last 15 years.
15 years. We gave her very simple recommendations. Very, very simple. One other individual who was having high cholesterol. She says, my cholesterol averages 220 to 240. My triglycerides were 320. And I've not been able to control them for the last 20 years with medication. We went to, this is in Florida, right? This is in Sarasota. We did a campaign. We gave her some recommendations, and she wrote back, and what did she say?
My cholesterol is normal.
And triglycerides went from 320 to 130 for the first time in 20 years. What about the individual who had diabetes? Tell us what happened with her.
Well, what was her A1C?
Her A1C, just to give you an idea, was 11.7. And for those of you who don't understand what is a hemoglobin A1C, it's her average blood sugar was about 300. Is that high, low? That's crazy high. What should it be?
80.
Yeah, around 80. It should be under 100 for sure, but definitely under 90 if it's fasting. Go ahead.
So we talked with her
How long?
an hour.
Okay.
And
Did you come back and give her more and more tips and whatever after that hour? Okay. Within 3 months, what had happened?
she lost 25 pounds.
How tall was she?
5'2".
5'1", 5'2"? She lost 25 pounds. It's now been about a year, actually more than a year, right? And what about the weight? What's happened to it?
It's continued. It's stayed off.
When her doctor drew her hemoglobin A1C again, what was it?
6.
What does 6 mean?
Not diabetes.
Not diabetes. In 1 hour, she had talked to her and reversed it. And this is customized for individual people. When I was at a convention, not this year's convention, but last year's conventions, the last 2 diabetics I talked to, how much did I talk to them about nutrition?
Not at all.
Why did I not talk to them about nutrition? That seems like that's cornerstone for diabetes.
That wasn't the cause of their issue.
That wasn't the cause of their issue.
Stress.
In the case of illness, Ministry of Healing, page 127, what should first be determined? The cause. The cause should be ascertained. Right habits of life should be established. Bad habits given up. And what's the third step? Does anyone know? Nature is to be assisted in expelling impurities. So detox, right, at that point. So those are the 3 steps that I always go about whenever I'm evaluating someone. Because if I can find the cause, you have the cure. Does that make sense? But the cause is often very elusive. I'll give you one example. There was a friend of mine who is in such good shape, she puts us to shame. She's a bodybuilder figure model. All vegan, exercises, great shape. She's a little older than I am. But she had a stroke. She actually lost consciousness during this stroke. And I was just like, wow, what were you doing? And she kind of shared, she said, well, I was visiting one of my relatives in the hospital. I said, what was happening? And they said, well, they were undergoing a very major medical procedure. And I said, are you sure it's a stroke? I said, can you give me the MRI report? Because it's very rare to lose consciousness during a stroke. I said, you would have to have a midbrain or pontine stroke or whatever to actually have yourself lose consciousness. And so she ended up sharing the MRI report, and sure enough, it was in the areas that would cause you to lose consciousness. And I said, can you think of any time in your life that you have had this happen before? Yes, when I was very young. I said, well, how old were you? I was 27. And I had this kind of droopy face on the right, but my leg went numb on the right, and my arm started jerking uncontrollably. And I said, okay, but she recovered from that. And I said, what was happening in your life at that time? And they basically said there was this horrible conflict with their mother, that they were trying to take them into court and to take custody of their children away from them. Very serious. And I said, tell me the kind of past of your life with your parents. Very difficult. Like the other children would be given presents and I would be left and passed by. Or I'd be given an inferior present. So they were like the black sheep of the family. So I gave her ways to resolve and heal this thing with this individual in their family. And it doesn't matter how they respond. You can heal it without their response. Because when Jesus was being crucified, what did he pray to his Father? Father, do what? For they? Now, were all of them, please forgive us, Jesus, we're taking you off the cross? Did they do that? No. But his heart toward them was forgiveness and love, right? But you have to deal with the issue. You have to confront. the issue. Jesus confronted. He said, you will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. If sins against you, do what? Go to them and rebuke them, right? Call them out. Try to reconcile if you can. But if they tell you to jump in the lake, you've done your duty, right? That's very important. And I will share with you 2 things from my own life, okay? If you look at my eyes very carefully, you'll see that one of them has a fold in it and one of them does not. Can you see it if you look closely? So I have one Asian eye and I have one Caucasian eye. But that makes sense, right? Because I'm half Asian and half Caucasian, right? Right? But it's true. I'm just telling you it's true. It's the truth. I'm just telling you the truth. So I'm going to tell you that when I was 5 years old, getting ready to go to school, okay? One of my parents took a piece of clear plastic tape and taped one of my eyelids. So it would look the same as the other one. But how do you think that affected me as a child? What happened is that all my life I felt that I was ugly. And that if a woman married me, she'd have to marry me for something other than my looks. And my mom was very encouraging. She would say, are you kidding? You can have any girl you want. You're so attractive. You're a doctor. You're this or whatever. But I still felt unattractive. And you know what? God brought me back to when I was 5 and gave me a dream of when my eyelid was being taped. And I afterwards confronted this parent and I told them what they had done. And they were very defensive. They were very, very defensive. And they said, oh, da, da, da. I was just trying to help you get ready for school, help you out, whatever. And I said, you taped my eyelid. What is a child going to think? That there's something wrong, right? I'm 5, right? But I want to tell you that even though this parent was defensive and didn't accept it, this parent eventually was baptized as a Seventh-day Adventist. And we were able to heal and to reconcile. I also had one other person in my family when I was a teenager and I was interested in becoming a physician. This person in my family and their spouse, who I greatly looked up to, sat me down and told me why I was not smart enough to do medicine. I'm very serious. This is very serious. They said, you don't have the memory or the intellect to be a physician. How do you think that would affect a teenager? I'm just asking, how do you think it's going to affect a teenager? Depends on the teenager. Maybe some of them would take it as a challenge, maybe? Something like that. Well, what happened when I got a very tough rotation, or maybe I got a bad score on a test, what do you think would play in my head? That they were right. But I want you to know that when I talk to people who actually were physicians, this relative and their spouse were not physicians, by the way, FYI. So I talked to people who were Adventist physicians, and every single one of them told me to do what? To do medicine. Not to do my dream, but they said, you can be a physician. Absolutely. There's no question in my mind. Every one of them said that. And that's what helped me to overcome this message in my mind from this family member who I greatly respected. And I greatly respected their opinion, you know. But when they said I shouldn't do that, that was hard, right? That was a challenge. Now, I invited this family member and also their spouse to my graduation from Stanford. And during that time, I took a moment and I took this person aside. And I talked to them and I appealed to them. I said, do you remember a conversation you had with me when I was a teenager? And they became very quiet. I said, you told me I wasn't smart enough to do medicine. And I could not deal with it. I couldn't make it. And I said, every time I had a bad score or a tough rotation, your voice would play in my head. And so I confronted them. Now, this individual did not apologize. Did you know that? This individual did not apologize. This individual said, well, you're obviously a physician now and you're graduating. But they didn't say, I'm sorry, I never should have said that. That was not right of me. to discourage you. They never said that. And they have not to this day said that. But what I'm telling you, the reason why I'm telling you these stories is that you can have healing without the other person doing that, right? God showed me what the issue was. But now I know that I am attractive, first and foremost, in God's eyes, but secondarily, in my wife's eyes, right? And that's really what matters to me, right? But the Bible says if someone sins against you, rebuke them. And it doesn't matter if they respond or not. These are serious things that are doing absolute destruction to your health. I promise you that. And you've got to get to the cause, the root of it. Because if you don't, it will be subconsciously even affecting you. And you won't even know it. You won't even know it. Because people might ask me, they said, well, how long have you felt like you were ugly? I said, my entire life. I can't even remember a time before that because it happened very early. Does that make sense? But I want you to know that that individual who had taped my eyelid, we were able to heal, to reconcile. They actually were baptized as Seventh-day Adventists. Praise the Lord Jesus. And it was just a beautiful thing. But all of us, I believe, have those things in our experience, in our lives. And we need to get to the bottom of them. We need to evaluate and determine the cause, right? Because as a man, what? So a merry heart doeth, but a broken spirit drieth the bone. So for me, my power areas all are here in these two areas. My heart and in my mind. There's no nutrition, there's no like physical parameters that are there, with the exception of sometimes I get like bad sleep during night shifts. That can actually cause a black to gray shift if I'm doing night shifts. But I just wanted to share this with you from my own experience so that you can know that there are ways that you can have healing. And the way is very simple. You do what God says, right? If thy brother sinneth against thee, go to him alone, right? And tell him what it was. If he doesn't accept you, then what? Matthew 18, right? Have you heard of Matthew 18? Yes. Right? You take how many others? One or two, right? And ideally, the point is that these people are unbiased and they're not involved, right? So they're more likely to be open-minded and objective, and the person is more likely to hear them. And if they won't hear the one or two people, then what do? You take it to the church. And then after you take it to the church, and they still don't, no, you don't hang them. That's terrible. How do you view them? As a what does the Bible say though? View them as a publican or a heathen. But how did Jesus treat the publicans? He loved them, right? He drew them with cords of love. You don't stop loving the person just because they would be disfellowshipped at this point, right? But you still love them. And that's what God asks you to do. And it doesn't matter if this person says, go jump in the lake, or this person denies it. Doesn't matter, right? You have done what the Word of God asked you to do. And so God's blessing now can rest upon you. He will bring you the healing because you've done what you can on your part. And that's why Paul says, as much as lieth in you, live at peace with all men, right? As much as it lies in you, not as much as it lies in them. That person may be like, sociopathic or something, right? They may have a mental disorder, right? And I can tell you there was one of my parents at one point was not talking to any of their children. They were like AWOL, right? For 3 years, for me, it was quite a long time. And even with my brother and sister, it was about a little over a year. Once this individual was converted and they became Adventists, I asked them, I said, what was happening during that time? You weren't talking to us. And you know what they told me? They said, Tim, forgive me. The devil just had a hold of me. I'm sorry. What do you say to that? What else do you say to that? I forgive you, right? That's it. That's beautiful, right? That's so healing. And that gives me such great peace, right? Knowing that. So I want everyone in this room to know that many of these remedies are not physical, like the traditional ones you think of. Because some people will say, oh, I've been vegetarian for 40 years, right? And then they have a heart attack, right? What's happened? I had a friend of mine, doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, cholesterol normal, blood pressure normal, not obese, regular physical activity, and they texted me an EKG. They said, hey, what do you think about this EKG? I'm like, is it yours? And I said, because it's an active heart attack. And they're like, yeah. I said, I hope you are in a hospital right now. They're like, I'm about ready to they're going to take me into the angio room and maybe put a stent in. But the problem with this individual is they're young too. They're about my age. But this person is so active, and they schedule their work time and ministry like back to back. Their issue was sleep. So it's different for each person, right? It's not always the same thing, because most people would approach heart disease and say, well, what are you eating? What's your cholesterol? What's your this? What's your that? I would just say, you need to go to sleep, right? You need to get rest, etc. So that's kind of an overview of our program, but I don't want you to take my word for it. What I would like to close with is this is the photographer who went and did all of the longevity zones, and they interviewed him. He's not Seventh-day Adventist, not Christian in particular, but this was his take on the longevity zones. Is there a lot? Okay.
Every star that shines is there for you. Before we've got to go, there's just one thing you should know. Everything you are means something to me.
My name is David McLean, and I traveled to 3 different cultures of longevity, which are Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, and Loma Linda, California. So we went and spent time in each of these places and tried to learn about their cultures of longevity and exactly what it is they're doing to live vital and healthy lives well into their hundreds. The first longevity hotspot we traveled to was Sardinia, Italy. So in this region, men are living as long as women, which is just a result. But also the Sardinians have a fanatical zeal for the family, and it's incredibly important. And at the time, I remember thinking, this is what being alive and having a family is. It's an archipelago in the far south of Japan, and it's home to the longest lived people on Earth. And we met who are leading active and very healthy lifestyles. You know, the 90-year-olds fishing 8 miles offshore with these old diving techniques on the reef. And we met an amazing woman who was over 100. Her name was Kamada, and she had been in a Moy, the rough who go through life together and help each other. And the energy invite morning. And all of these centenarians had icky. I don't think it's an accident that that's part of the reason that they're living so long. So one of the cornerstones of Okinawan longevity is caloric restriction. A lot of food. The trick is that the food that they're eating is all low in themselves in their gardens. And they would go to the store for all of Japan. And it was quite shocking and somewhat disturbing to see this culture of longevity disappearing right before our eyes. By far the most surprising fact that I took away from this story is that Seventh-day Adventists outlive their American counterparts by about 10 years. What are they doing? Quite simply, the Seventh-day Adventists, who largely populate Loma Linda, California, have a religion that reinforces positive, healthy behaviors. For example, if you're a devout Seventh-day Adventist, you are a vegetarian, non-smoker, non-drinker, who takes a Sabbath every Saturday, where for one whole day you have to just unplug. So we met many incredible people there. The most incredible by far was a woman named Marge Jatan, who had just turned 100 and renewed her driver's license. So we went for a cruise, but before we did that, we had to go through a more and rides a stationary bike. And interestingly, the Seventh-day Adventists are the only culture of longevity edge. And I photographed a baptism at this church, and I remember thinking, wow, this is the perfect example of how forward. I think in America we tend to marginalize old people, kind of put them away in retirement homes. Cultures represent the potential to see your great-grandchildren grow up, a potential away with from this assignment was that, wow, I now have this sense of responsibility based on choices that I make. I'd read that genetics only account for about 30% of how long you live. So, the majority of how long you live is up to your lifestyle. It's up to you.
Longest COVID pandemic. And the longevity, like the average lifespan of the average Adventist, lives to 88. So 11 years, but this God to the Lord. But he gave that day to God, he just gives it right back to them because they live how much longer? 11 years. What's 11 pastor would say this? Incredible. People ask me and say, well, what is the secret? It must be your diet, right? Did you know that there are two major world Buddhists and Hindus? Did you know if you're a Brahmin, you're vegan? Classes in the caste system, right? In the Hindu religion. If you're a Brahmin, that's up there, right? These guys don't eat garlic or onion, and they're also vegan. Now, if you're a Buddhist monk, did you know you're supposed to be vegan? Isn't that crazy? But these guys don't. But remember, what's very interesting is the latest Adventist health study showed that only 10% of us exercise daily. Did you know that? Very low physical activity. So that's probably not it either. Well, it must be genetics, right? But you remember what David McLean said? Genetics only account for 30%. And that does not explain that when African Americans join the Seventh-day Adventist Church, their hypertension and their diabetes risk goes down. Interesting. What about optimism? Do you remember what the most important character is? Conscientiousness. Very good. Well, what about faith? I will tell you that there is some advantage to Mormonism, but he's found it specifically in Caucasian men who are high priests in that religion. Now, I don't know who a high priest is. Maybe that's like the devout, ones of their religion. They've reached a certain point. But since that's not a general sort of advantage, that's not really as newsworthy. Does that make sense? Well, that was not now. That was not now. That's not true. If you ask a Mormon, do you believe in polygamy? You know what they'll tell you? No. But if you ask them, did you? Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
That would be the FLDS now.
What's the FLDS?
Fundamental.
At our bodies. The Bible says, beloved, I pray that you are prosperous in how many things? And be in just as your soul prospers. And that is not something random. When people are dyeing their hair, they're wanting the plastic surgery, they're doing those individuals are wanting to come back home. Do you realize that? They're wanting to come back to Eden. They don't know the path. They don't know the way back there. Because Ecclesiastes 3:11 says that God has placed what? Eternity. In how many people's hearts? What? The way, the truth, and the life. This is my appeal. Who are Seventh-day Adventists here? Prophets and Kings, book from Ellen White, based on kind of after the kings, like it's from Solomon to like the close of the Old Testament, right? At the court of Babylon were gathered representatives from where? Creme de la creme, right? Representatives from all lands, men of what kind of talent? The highest talent, and men the most richly gifted. So these guys had the greatest genetic advantage, right? Most richly endowed with natural gifts and possessed of the broadest culture that the world could bestow. These guys were genetically gifted. They came from Harvard, Stanford, all of these elite schools. It says they had the broadest culture that the world could what? Bestow. Yet among them all, among how many of them? All, the Hebrew youth were what? What does it mean if you're without a peer? What does it mean to say a group of your peers? There was none other like them, right? Do you think that only 3 people were captives from Judah? Do you think only 4 of them? Right? But it's saying that among Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, how many were like them? Not one. The Hebrew youth were without a peer. And in what things were they without a peer? The first thing that Ellen White says. She goes for a superficial quality first. Did you realize that? In physical strength, and what else? In beauty, another superficial quality. In physical strength and beauty, in mental vigor and literary attainment, they stood how? What does it mean if you are unrivaled? You can't even be upset. There's no one in your dimension, basically. Unrivaled. The erect form, the firm, elastic step, the fair countenance, the undimmed senses, the untainted breath. Did you realize that's a marker of health? The untainted breath. All were so many certificates of good habits, insignia of the nobility with which nature honors those who are obedient to her laws. My appeal to you is this. Most of you in this audience are Seventh-day Adventists. God, do you know what He designed you for? To be the light of the world. To bring the 3 angels' message to the entire world. Did you know that? He gives you the same calling that He gives to Israel. Israel was given favor and a distinction among the nations, not for themselves, but so they could do what? Share it, right? And that's the thing. God has given you a tremendous, tremendous health message. Do you realize God has made you the elite longevity zone on this planet? And you are not even a geographic area. You are a religion. God has made you champion for the purpose of sharing that with those who need it. With you, God desires to fulfill Deuteronomy. He says the nations will come to you and say, who is this God? And what are these laws that you have, right? They will come to you and ask, what is going on? What are you doing to have this robust health? And what will we say to them is my question. Do you know how long it takes someone to judge you when they first meet you? How long? It's 7 seconds. It's a little bit longer than half a second, but the average is 7 seconds. What are they going to learn about you in 7 seconds? Not quite nothing. They're going to learn a few things. What are they going to learn? Well, probably if you're humble or not. They might get a few words out of your mouth, the way you hold yourself, your physical appearance, right? Body language, yes. Your expression on your face. Hopefully there'll be a smile there, right? So 7 seconds is all. Now, are they always right? No, they're not always right. But it's hard to overcome that first impression. You've heard people say you never get a second chance to make a first impression, right? So that's my appeal to those of you who do know the message for this time, is that when you realize that God brought people out of Egypt, do you know how many people were in that group, they estimate?
2 million.
Probably about 2 or 3 million, that's correct. What was their incidence out of 2 million of diabetes? What was their incidence of heart disease out of 2 million? What was their incidence of arthritis, incidence of obesity, of arthritis, of hypertension, of lupus, of whatever you want to name, right? Of 0? That's crazy. People published. They would say it's unreal. It doesn't exist. In a population of 2 million, you're going to have people with heart disease. You're going to have people with this and that and the other thing, right? But they had a 0 incidence. But why did they have a 0 incidence? No, walk. And he had given them, even the nation, God. And what are these laws that you have that has given you this community? Not just spiritually, but physically also. Why is it that you don't have uncontrolled diabetes? I'm losing my limbs by the moment. What are you doing? Again, the doors are open, right? And I'm telling you right now, this world is ripe for the health message. They're open. Yes, it's the wedge, exactly. And I believe our opportunity for the message was during the pandemic. Was absolutely, not just for the health message, but for the 3 angels message. Do you know what I told people during the pandemic? I gave them the 3 angels message in 30 seconds. Because what would they ask me when they found out I was a doctor? What do you think? 3 questions they asked me right away when they found out I was a doctor.
Should I get the jab?
Number 1, should I get the jab? Number 2 question. No. Which one? And number 3, does anyone know what that might be? What is behind all this? And I would give them the 3 angels message in 30 seconds. I said, number 1, you need to talk to your doctor about that and determine, number 1, if you're immune already or not. God is what? Love. So that means, does that make sense? So when you see things like bribery, manipulation, force, and coercion, who does that? But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your children may live. Those are quotes from Joshua. Those are quotes from Moses. But they're all the appeal of God to each one of us, right? God gives you a free will choice. That is his character. And I'm telling each one of these people, I said they realize now with the lockdowns, carbon emissions has been less, much less. So they want to keep one day of rest. And what day might that be? I wonder, right? And I said, when that day of rest is enforced by law, that is the mark of the beast. You must not do it. Because that goes against the law of God. 30 seconds, 3 angels message. Third angel's message, excuse me, right? Mark of the beast is the 3rd angel's message. So what I explain to people is just very quickly the character of God versus the character of Satan. God never compels you to worship him. He doesn't force you to worship him. But in the days of Daniel, your choice was bow to the idol or what? Or roast, right? Or roast. And it's not going to start off like that. It's going to start off, well, you know, it looks like you violated the, you know, whatever, the green law or whatever, so we're going to fine you at first, and then maybe lose your job, right? Things like that. Because you can't buy or sell eventually. And what I believe happened during the last 4 years was kind of a dry run, right? To use the same principles to see if that would work. Could we bribe people into compromising their conscience? Sure. Could we threaten people to compromising their conscience? Sure, right? So that's the concept that I shared is that people, when they're afraid of disease, when they're afraid of death, when they're afraid of losing their job, that's the time to strike when the iron is hot. That's when the interest is there. So I want to appeal to each one of you. Is there something in your life that you can think of in your health that could be improved? How many of you think there's something you could improve in your health? Raise your hand. If you can think of that one thing, I would like for you to make a decision today that you are going, not just for yourself, but for the people around you, because they're looking thing to me, right? I can tell you it's a very interesting thing. I was people and invited them, hey, we have a weekly Bible study, whatever, but the people who rent, they come and go all the time, so I don't know them, right? We don't know though, right? We know some of them.
As much as reasonable.
As much as, right? So I would say that my appeal to you is not just for your own health. And I'm telling you right now that the time is going to come when God will have us do the work that we have neglected to do under the times of peace. We're told that we will do the work eventually, but under the most extreme duress if we have not done it under the times of peace. I don't know about you, but I see God heal this earth and heal ourselves. And so my appeal, there was a gentleman who came, not to my health campaign, but one of my colleagues. He didn't change his diet. He didn't change exercise. He didn't change any of the natural remedies. He just started drinking Mountain Dew. That's all. And he swapped out Mountain Dew for water. But little did we know that it was a truck driver and drank literally 2-liter, one change. Because you swap out Mountain Dew, 2-liter bottles of Mountain Dew, that's going to make a change in your life. So don't underestimate the change that you're making. But just ask God to help you with that one thing. If that's your decision, stand with me as we close in prayer. Loving Father in heaven, thank you so much that you've given us light and you've given us life more abundantly. And I pray, Lord, that you would give grace and strength to each person who's standing right now. Give them help. Give them grace. Give them an example. Make them a light to their communities, Lord, that they might share the blessings that they have in Jesus. And I pray, Lord, you know that they're standing because they want to make a difference in their own health, but not for themselves, Lord. Make it be a blessing to all those around them. And I pray that you would give them the encouragement that you have come, that we might have life and that we might have it more abundantly. We thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. I know that some of you may have to leave, but if you do have a question for me, I can stay. No. I've decided I'm going to do the burgers tonight. I'm just going to wait until then, but I'll save my plate for tomorrow morning. But is there anyone who has a question for me? Okay, what's the question?
For the last 2 years here, they say it's really perfect.
Praise God.
Well, in March, my husband, before he died,
What happened? Are you okay?
let these people